And one time with the other text that we're going to use, which is the text that I have, a special text version of this.
Is that separating the two authors?
Yes, you got it. You're correct. Yeah, so
done that before.
Surprise. We have. And I don't know if it was even in the last. I don't even think it was in the last decade. By the way, I just want to make everybody realize that
I feel old.
how long ago that was. Let me post up and share this up for everybody to see, and I'm going to put it up here for everyone to see. So what we finished with last week in chapter 5 was the fact that in the beginning of chapter 6 is things have gone kind of haywire with God's plan. So much so that what it says is that God literally says, God says, look, I see how man's wickedness is on the earth, how every plan is devised by his mind is nothing but evil all the time. It doesn't say sometimes, it says all the time. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. And that's kind of what we left off last time, with, of course, the exception of saying, and again, God says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to blot everything out. But Noah found favor with the Lord. And so we don't end on the sad note, which clearly this is sad, but it ends on the hope of Noah. Noah is the hope. And I'm going to call him Noah because in Hebrew, that is the name. Noah, and not Noah. Noah is actually a girl's name in Israel. But Noah with a ch at the end is the male version, and that's the way it's pronounced.
But we don't know why he found favor with the Lord, correct?
It doesn't say, and we're actually going to read it at the very beginning. What's interesting about this is, technically speaking, and we got to point this out, when we read this, and this is one of the reasons why this is so amazing, when we read that last line, V'Noach matza chen be'enai Adonai, which again, God, that Noah finds favor, which in literally in Hebrew, the words matza chen be'enai, which is a kind of a poetic way of saying it, God found favor in the eyes of God. Matza chen means to find grace or to find favor, and be'enei Adonai means in the eyes of God, which again is another kind of anthropomorphic description of God. As we saw, God's heart was sad. God's eyes find Noah and find and God likes what he sees. If you want to use those words that we use, the idiom that we use in English, right? Which we like what we see. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is the last line of the first portion of the Bible. So when we're reading the Torah, and this is why we're reading it differently in this class, if we were compelled to read everything in the first Torah portion in one night, we would have had to read all the way from that creation of the world on the first day, all the way to Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. From chapter 1, verse 1, Bereshit bara Elohim, Noah, until V'Noach matza chen be'enai Adonai, that's all one portion. So we literally begin, if you think about it, the first portion of the Torah begins with the creation of the universe, and God literally saying at the end, I am going to undo my creation. And when you think about that, when you consider for a moment the scope of what goes on in that first portion, it's astounding. And it's actually, of course, it's too much to comprehend, which is why we slowed it down and we read it over a few weeks. But why I want to remind you of that or take you back to that moment is that essentially then what we get in the first week of reading this, we get a Torah portion that gives us the beauty and glory of creation, and God finding it flawed by the end of the Torah portion. It's years later, right? It's thousands of years later if we add up the length of time that these people live. But when we consider it, if we watch the movie, if you will, this is one episode. This is the first episode. And you'd be like, well, wait, are you telling me that we're in the first episode going to see all of that happen? And I would say yes. If there's 13 episodes, which is roughly, by the way, how many episodes that we have in many television programs today, if we had 13 episodes of Genesis, which we do, 13 Torah portions, this first portion would have been a lot, and it is quite overwhelming. So that's where we finished last time, and we begin this portion this time. And again, I promise you, as we read this, and as you notice that there's some things that don't quite make sense, hold off on your disbelief and on your befuddlement of reading this, because I promise you, I'm going to give you at least something to deal with here that will make you maybe more comfortable. I don't know, maybe not, maybe less comfortable. I know my intention is to help. So the portion begins, this is the line of Noah, which again begins Ele Toldot Noah, just like chapter 2 began Ele Toldot. This is the story of creation. Now we get the first kind of like, but these are the generations of Noah, and that's the Torah portion's name, Ele Toldot Noah. This is the generations. This is the story. Again, you can also translate the word Toldot is this is the accounting. This is the story of Noah, and then that's the first 3 words in Hebrew. It's 5 words in English, and then Noah says again, but then there's like, that's why they have that's why they have the hyphen there. The dash here, the hyphen is Noah, another idea, or now Noah, Ish Tzadik Tamim Haya B'dorotav. Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his age. Noah walked with God. And that, quite frankly, there, as the question was asked, why Noah? Why Noah? What do we know about Noah? Why was he chosen? Doesn't say anything in the previous part where it says Noah found favor in the Lord, but now we have this qualification here that Noah was a righteous man, ish tzaddik, right? A tzaddik. He was blameless in his age. Now, this is the only information we get about him. And of course, as we get to Abraham in a couple of weeks or a week or so, the next portion we read about Abraham. We don't know a lot about what makes Abraham special either, but we see what's special about Abraham by his behavior. Noah, we really don't get a lot about him from his behavior, other than he follows directions really well. We also read that he also ends up, and I'm not going to ruin the story for you, he does some things which also disappoint or don't kind of live up to the potential of the first person of a new age, which is what he is. So he doesn't, the rabbis understand that Noah it's difficult to find a lot of good things about him, other than it says in the Torah, flat out, he's an Ish Tzaddik. But it also says the word Tamim Haya B'dorotav. So it says a righteous man, and then you have the semicolon there. It says he was blameless in his age. And the word Tamim means pure, or it means simple. It means, he translated as Tom is blameless, pure. But the Torah does say in his generation,
but he was a heck of a carpenter though, Rabbi.
Well, he followed directions really well. Yeah. He also, by the way, had a long time to build it, as we're going to see. But yes, the rabbis are puzzled by that in his age. And we've talked about this before. It's a line of departure, and I always discuss it with young people when they read this, because to me, this is one of those opportunities for learning, this opportunities for discussion that I think why the Torah is so wonderful, especially as we get older. Because we oftentimes think of this story as the ultimate children's story. And I will tell you, this is so far from being a children's story that it's amazing that like people don't get it, because it's a frightening story. It's a clearly catastrophic, cataclysmic disaster story. It's an epic. It's an epic of ultimate destruction. That's why the good biblical movie versions of this have always tried to capture the destructive power of this flood. And obviously the last version of Noah was not critically acclaimed and didn't do very well in the box office. The version of it that Darren Aronofsky did, people were very bothered by it. Though I will say that Aronofsky really hewed very close to the Jewish tradition and to the Midrash on it. Look, there's a challenge here with Noah as a person. The rabbis say he was righteous in his generation, which they take in a very interesting direction, which is that compared to other people in other generations, like the generation 10 generations later of Abraham, no one would have noticed Noah at all. He's only righteous in his generation because everyone else around him is such a scoundrel. And so Noah was good, but really compared to everybody else. And so they really they downgrade Noah's greatness by saying in other ages, he wouldn't have even been noticed. No one would have paid attention to him. He never would have been singled out. But in his generation, he was so much better than everybody else because they were all so bad. They were all deserving of destruction. They were all evil. So compared to them, he's good. But otherwise, he's not so good. So the rabbis traditionally kind of put Noah in an in-between area, which is that he's not great, but he's not bad. He's kind of in between. And so the rabbis, interestingly, don't, for the most part, don't consider him a hero. I mean, they consider him a righteous person for his generation. They consider him a guy who preserves humanity. But there's a reason why we're not B'nai Noah. I mean, everybody's B'nai Noah. Everyone is a descendant of Noah. But the Jewish people don't consider ourselves the descendants of Noah. Noah was usually not a super popular Hebrew name. Even there were some Jews named Noah, but oftentimes not the top name. It's a little bit more popular now, maybe the last 20, 30 years, but not generally like the name that a lot of people were named in the Jewish world, because Abraham makes a huge departure. When we get to Abraham, we're going to see somebody who does things that are worthy of him being the ancestor of the Jewish people. Look, Noah is the ancestor of Abraham, but he's also the ancestor of everybody else. And so he's the ancestor of humanity in a sense, right? Just like Adam is the ancestor of humanity, Noah is now the ancestor of everyone else who survives. So we're all B'nai Noah. Every human being is a Noahide, is a descendant of him. But what we have to do, and Sarah Renson just posted, you did not raise the bar, which is a nice way of putting it, which is, again, what does he seem to do? Let's keep that in mind as we read the story, because he seems good at following directions, but he doesn't really seem to care that much about everybody else, which is the way that Aronofsky goes. If you ever watched the movie Noah that he did, he really has, it's Russell Crowe plays the character. He really isn't, he's a very flawed character. Let's put it that way. There's parts of him that are disturbing. Let's put it that way. But there's an interesting thing about this, which is that the rabbis, for the most part, as I said, had kind of an overall kind of an ambivalent feeling about Noah. However, there was an interesting point as the rabbis kind of put through this idea of, he was only blameless in his age compared to everyone else. But Dorotav, there's a reason why that's there, right? The qualification. One of the rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda, points out to the rest of the rabbis, you say that, but how much harder is it to be a good person when everyone else is bad? And doesn't Noah actually deserve extra credit and extra recognition for being a good person when everyone else is doing bad things? And isn't it harder? And this is the point that I always bring out to young people. It is harder when everyone else is making bad decisions to make good decisions, and it takes a lot of courage. And so maybe Noah did have more courage than we give him credit for, and he should be considered, righteous, because it's hard to be good when everyone else is bad. It's so hard to do the right thing when everyone else is doing the wrong thing. And again, you could say, well, yeah, but you know that. You go, yeah, you know it, but you know the power of peer pressure. You know how hard it is to speak out against something when everyone else is doing the other thing, and how hard it is to just even secretly deviate from the plan. And again, this is kind of like I use this example with older people. And unfortunately now it's almost a generational lack of understanding. I said, this is the Oscar Schindler version, which is, Oscar Schindler was not a good person. He was not a good husband. He was not good to his family. He was a Nazi. He was a member of the Nazi Party. He exploited the slave labor that existed in under the Nazi regime. He went into Poland and like a lot of German business people took advantage of war, of what was going on during the war. But yet he did something amazingly courageous and amazingly heroic. And so he risked his life in the end. And so did Noah, to some extent, risk his life by not going along with everybody else? And so there is this idea that's sometimes given over, and it is a little bit in the movie version, this last version, is that Noah actually could have been killed by his surrounding companions and colleagues and fellow individuals at the time, because what made someone have the courage to not do the bad things? Was he maybe even risking his life in not going along with the destructive tendencies and horrible behavior of everybody else? So keep that in mind. I mean, those are we'll see what Noah does, and we'll see it right away.
There's no law at this point. I mean, how's he to know what's good he doesn't have the Noahic law. He doesn't have any law.
Well, he has not been given any, you're right. The people have not been given any laws, which you and I will say, well, how do they don't know any better. There is that possibility, but there is another possibility which the rabbis are not going to let up on, which is that there is an eternal Torah which people have had from the very beginning. And so Abraham, though he doesn't get any mitzvot, commandments, other than to circumcise his son, the rabbis imagine that he gets all the commandments, like he knows everything. And that essentially that Torah existed even before him, so that he, that he's taught by his ancestors Shem and Ever. Shem is, as we're going to see, is one of Noah's sons. So there's this idea that there is law. We know that Noah gets laws. We're going to see what we call the Noahide Laws, the development of the Noahide Laws. The rabbis are able to derive that Noah at least gets other commandments. But I will tell you, there is this kind of weird, it's almost as if the rabbis will say, yeah, the Torah was re-revealed to us at Mount Sinai, but everybody from the beginning really knew it. Adam even knew it. And so there's, like, you and I could say, yeah, they don't know any better. They don't have any laws, but the rabbis didn't like that idea. They didn't like the idea that people shouldn't instinctively know some right from wrong. But even beyond that, they would say, no, they knew. God actually instilled in these early people this knowledge that they had of a kind of a Torah that existed from the beginning of time. Now, I want to tell you, it's kind of a mystical concept, and it's one that, it's kind of grounded in this idea that the Torah essentially was created at the beginning of creation, that literally the Torah emerges in that first moment of energy. It allows then for this idea that people were beholden to a law before Mount Sinai. So, which also, by the way, means that the Israelites, while they were enslaved in Egypt, knew the law and had forgotten it, which the rabbis are fine. They understand that consequence, and they want you to know that they know that yes, the people did forget the law while they were living in Egypt for those generations. So all of this is a consequence of kind of there being a Torah that always existed. I think to some extent it's because there's this Jewish idea that we have that the Torah is eternal, which means it's from the beginning until the end. There's always Torah. It's always there. And we also kind of want to say, well, why would God give people no direction? And so they must have had direction. They must have known better. But it is fair to ask the question, what direction did they have? How did they know? I think there is this other kind of pattern in the Torah that you could argue really does happen, which is that people evolve. By the way, if you think about that concept of people evolving and people actually developing and getting better and stronger, that also is contrary to this kind of idea that you have people who existed in the past who were smarter, stronger, lived longer, and were more powerful than us, and that we're actually devolving. So there's two ways of looking at human history that are really in contrast to each other. And the rabbis oftentimes kind of go for that mythic idea that we're nothing compared to our ancestors. And part of it you see in Genesis when we go through these long lengths of time that these people lived. This is kind of indicative of this idea that people did know they were smarter, they were stronger, they had greater connection, like God spoke to them more. All of those things, that's kind of that idea that we're actually further away from that greatness, which again, is presumptive of the fact that they had the Torah too, that they had this light that they had around them. So keep that in mind. We see it definitely in Genesis, the way people read that differently. But I think both are possibilities. There's evidence for both approaches in this Torah portion and the previous words that we read. So let's look at what happens with Noah. And again, please, if you see things and you go, what, where'd that come from? I promise you, I will help you maybe with understanding that. So Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. Okay, so he has 3 sons. The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. When God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its way on earth, God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I'm about to destroy them with the earth, which seems to mean all flesh, all life, animals and people. And the direction is make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make it an ark with compartments and cover inside and out with pitch. Let's do a quick little run through of what that actually is saying. Okay, the easy understanding of this: make yourself an ark. And in Hebrew, the word is a teva. It's a teva. And it says made out of atzei gopher, gopher wood. Now, I want to tell you, the word gopher wood is not then translated. It's a transliteration of the word gopher. So it is nothing to do with gophers. Nothing to do with those little creatures, the little golden gophers of University of Minnesota. Nothing to do with gophers. It is some type of wood, which there are debates on what kind of wood it is. It's clearly a wood that's waterproof, or at least can be made waterproof by then covering with pitch. So it would take in that tar, that pitch, and then that would allow it to be waterproof. So is it cypress? Is it cedar? It's some type of wood. In other translations, I'm just going to tell you, it says sometimes just they translate as the Vulgate, which is the Latin translation, just says out of smooth or planed wood. Could be pine, could be cedar, could be fir, could be sandalwood. All of these things are possible. And so ever since the King James Version, trust me, you can look at your King James if you want. I think you know it because you've heard the words gopher wood before. It's ever since the English translation, the first English, no one's ever translated it. They just transliterated. So, and they didn't have gophers, by the way, in ancient Israel, just so you know. That's an American from the Americas, gophers. So has nothing to do with gophers. So it is a teva. It is not a ship. It is not a boat. There is no rudder. And so every time people say, well, what was it like? It's much more like a bowl, a floating bowl, than a ship by our standards. Okay. So with a rudder and with sails and with those, doesn't say anything about that. it actually is pretty clear what's going on in this vessel, which is why it's even hard to call it a ship or a boat, because we always use the word ark, which is a better translation of the word, because if you think about it, an ark is not a ship. An ark is a box. It's the same, it's not the same word we use for our ark, or for, which I told you, our ark, the word is an aron, which is also the word for a casket. It's more of a square box. This is a teva, which is the same word that's used for the basket that Moses is put in when he's in the Nile. So this is a floating bowl, if you will, rather than something that won't capsize, rather than a ship or something that can be steered. So there are words for boats and ships in the Torah. Torah doesn't use those words. So it is best translated as again, well, we use the word ark, so let's just use the word ark, but it's much more, again, the connotation to it is really, you're going to get in this bowl, in this box, in this wooden thing, and you don't know where you're going. You're not in charge of it. A teva is not something that you control.
So I did this, did this project with my Jewish day school students, where we actually made the arcs based on the dimensions. We just reduced it by 99% to make it more reasonable because it's so big. And when we had built it, it was clear that it really looks like a pea pod. And so it made me think that it's like a seed, right? Like a green bean, a green pea pod, and all of the animals and the people inside of it are like the seeds inside the pea pod, just floating in the water until it is able to make root on land and repopulate. So, and Moses, and I think about Moses too, is going down that water like he is like the seed of what will be the Jewish people. So it kind of makes sense that it has that same word.
Yep.
Like, watch out, this thing is loaded.
Yep. And when you think about the fact that life is going to spring forward from it, this is really an important idea that we have for springing forth life. That's why a pea pod is kind of a really cool is a cool image for it too. So yeah, it's cool. So let's take a look at it. It's interesting because the word teva in Hebrew, spelled differently, means nature, which it's a different word. It's one with a tet versus this is with a taf. But it is interesting that the word teva in Hebrew means nature. So there's sandals, teva sandals that you might have seen before. Those are teva naot. We actually went there once on one of our trips to Israel. It's kind of more of a sales stop than we didn't do it a lot because I think people didn't, they can shop on their own. But the word teva is nature. So nature, teva naot means nature, like nature sandals. So it sounds the same, but it's actually a different word. All right, so let's look at the dimensions. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. And so, Sarah, as you were saying, as you built this, you found it to look more like a pod?
Yeah, because it's not very wide, it's not very tall, but it's very long. And yeah, so and a pod is kind of sealed on the inside too to protect those seeds. And it only has like the one window, I think.
Well, yeah, let's get to the window. So again, it's longer, much longer than it is wide. But it is, as you can see, it is, if we look at these dimensions, we're talking about, several hundred feet. It's a huge vessel, but it is, people have built it, and there are people who've built. There are a few different places where you can see rebuilt versions of the ark. it is a massive structure. So we're talking about 300 cubits is about 450 feet. And it's, it's the length. I mean, 300 cubits, as you can see, is pretty much the length of a football field. So we're actually longer than a football, a little longer than a football field, but it's close. I mean, I guess when you include the end zones, it's about the length of a football field. It's a fairly big vessel. And here's the way it looked. Make an opening for daylight in the ark and terminate it within a cubit of the top. Put the entrance to the ark in its side. Make it with bottom, second, and third decks. So it's 3 decks, okay? 3 decks. And the opening for the animals is on its side, but there is an opening, a window, if you will, that is towards the top of the ark. So an opening towards the top. Other than that, must be pretty dark in there. I mean, it's a huge vessel and there's literally just an opening for daylight at the top, which again seems to maybe give you a little idea that things are going to get really wet around it. And the only place you can have an opening is at the very top. And God flat out says, for my part, I'm about to bring the flood, waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh under the sky in which there is breath of life. Everything on earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant, my covenant with you. And you shall enter the ark with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. So it does say that the sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are married and they have wives. And of course, Noah has a wife. And of all that lives of all flesh, you shall take 2 of each of them into the ark to keep alive with you. They shall be male and female. Well, that makes sense. 2 of everything. 2 of everything into the ark, male and female. From birds of every kind, cattle of every kind of creeping thing, 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive. For your part, take of everything that is eaten and store it away to serve as food for you and for them. Noah did so, just as God commanded him, so he did. And what we know about Noah is just that. He did everything that God commanded him. So he did. And it actually seems to say it twice. Noah did so, just as God commanded, he did it. Vaya'as Noah, he did it, and God commanded him, and he did it. So Noah is very, very good at following directions. Noah, at no time, and you just read the end of the chapter, at no time does Noah say to God, but wait, what about everybody else? There's no one time does Noah ask a question. Why? Is everyone bad? Is this what we got to do? There's no hope for humanity? Can't start over? Noah doesn't do a thing other than what God tells him to do. And the rabbis feel uncomfortable about this because the rabbis understand that something's missing here from Noah and his lack of dialogue with God. And what is so amazing, and the rabbis caught on to it, and why they said Noah is nothing compared to Abraham, is because we're going to read in a few chapters, literally 12 chapters from now, God pulls Abraham aside when he's about to destroy a couple cities, not a country, not the whole world, a couple cities we know as Sodom and Gomorrah. And God pulls Abraham aside and says to him, I'm about to destroy these 2 cities. And Abraham, for his part, says to him, wait a second, God, there might be some good people in those cities. And the rabbis know that. And I'm only throwing that out to remind you, and many of you have read that story before. No, there's not a peep. I'm going to destroy everyone in the world, all of your cousins, all of your aunts and uncles, everybody. And Noah never says nothing, not a boo, nothing. And so the rabbis are upset by that. There's no questioning of this. He just goes and does it. And again, you can make the argument, God told you to do it, you go do it. But why does Noah not say a word? And overall, our tradition kind of faults Noah for not raising a question even. And it's for these kinds of reasons that people say Noah was not ready to be the one who would be the ancestor and the progenitor, if you will, of an ethical monotheism or a form of belief or a form of living that we're ready for. He's better than everybody else. And maybe 10 generations after Adam, if we follow the idea that people are evolving, he is an evolved person for his generation. But humanity hasn't maybe evolved yet to a point where they can actually say to God, well, wait, I get that people are screwed up, but is everybody screwed up? There's not one good person in the world. There's no way to test to see whether these people are good. And interestingly enough, as we read this, the rabbis build on that idea that there was an opportunity here that Noah doesn't, that God was waiting for Noah to say something. So chapter 7 begins. Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark with all your household, for you alone have I found righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean animal you shall take 7 pairs, males and their mates, and of every animal that is not clean, 2, a male and its mate. And I know we'll get back to it. Why is it 7 pairs here and then 2 of each that are clean, that are not clean? The 2 of
So I have a theory on this.
Yes.
My theory is that the clean animals are prey animals, and the unclean animals are predator animals, because like bunnies reproduce a lot and wolves don't, and you need several bunnies to feed a wolf, but you don't need much to feed the rabbits, right? Because so I think what it is and also there was a document, a show I watched about where they reintroduced wolves into this part of nature where they weren't anymore, and they had once they came in and they ate more of the prey animals, the bunnies had like overrun everything and actually changed the shape of the land, because they were eating so much of the grass and everything. Anyway, I really believe that it is prey and predator, and that the reason that they're not clean is because they eat other animals.
Okay. So the point is again, we had one direction that there's 2 of every animal, and now there's a slightly different version of this. Hold on to it. We will, I promise you, come back to some other. That's a great lesson too that Sarah says, is that it's because we need to have more of them, because they're gonna. Now at this point, by the way, we need to point out, we don't have any indication yet that animals are supposed to eat anything other than grains or vegetables or things that can grow on the ground. Same as people. People have not been given permission yet to eat animals. And I promise you, we're going to get it explicitly. It's not like we guess that they are. We actually have an explicit line coming up in just a couple chapters when we get out of the ark where we're given permission. But at this point, we're still in the Genesis chapter 1 mode, which is I've given you all these green things to eat, all this stuff that has life that grows on the ground. That's what you can eat, and that's what the animals can eat. So at this moment, we didn't necessarily have to have. Now, you're right, Sarah. It could be that, well, we know what's going to happen. We're going to have animals start eating, and we're going to start eating animals, and everything's going to be eating everything else. But at this stage, all they really need to do up until now is just take stuff on the boat that everybody can eat, which is pretty much green stuff. Okay.
I have an idea. Maybe there's 2 authors.
Stop it. All right, you. We're gonna get to this. So, of the birds of the sky, also 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive upon all the earth. For in 7 days' time I will make it rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out from the earth all existence that I created. And Noah did just as the Lord had commanded him. Now, again, I promise you we'll come back to this. Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. Waters upon the earth. Noah was with his sons, his wife, his sons' wives, went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of the clean animals, of the animals that are not clean, of the birds, and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 of each, male and female, came to Noah in the ark as God had commanded Noah. That's the problem there, folks, is that it says right there, 2 of everything, including clean and unclean. So anyways, on the 7th day, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So again, 7 days, just like 7 days of creation. Now we have 7 days of being wiped out. Yep. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, by the way, that's right about now, by the way. Yeah, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, that would be the 17th day of Cheshvan, which this year is, it was Saturday. It was Saturday. This last Saturday was the day of the flood. It rained pretty hard on Monday, but anyways. So in the 600th year, right, is when this happened. So Noah is already advanced in years. But it says here, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky broke open. So under and from above, not just rain, water coming from underneath the ground. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. That same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japhet, went into the ark with Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons. They and all the beasts of every kind, all cattle of every kind, all creatures of every kind that creep on the earth, and all the birds of every kind, every bird, every winged thing, they all came to Noah into the ark, 2 of each of all flesh, in which there was a breath of life. Thus they that entered comprised male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him. And the Lord shut him in. And the Lord shut him in. The flood, which again, I mean, this is a God that literally closes the door of the ark on Noah. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and raised the ark so that it rose above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark drifted upon the waters. When the waters had swelled much more upon the earth, all the highest mountains everywhere under the sky were covered. 15 cubits higher did the wet waters swell, as the mountains were covered. And all the flesh that stirred on the earth perished, birds, cattle, and beasts, and all the things that swarmed on the earth, and all mankind. All mankind. So all kinds of animals, the domesticated animals, the wild animals, the birds, the beasts, the swarming things, the lizards, everything died. All in whose nostrils were the merest breath of life, all that was on dry land died. So for all those people that said, what about the fish? It's covered. It says the fish didn't need to come into the ark. Water, they could live in the water. But everything that was on land and anything that had to go onto the land, any bird was gone. All existence on earth was blotted out. Man, cattle, creeping things, and the birds of the sky, they were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left and those with him in the ark. And when the waters had swelled on the earth 150 days, God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God caused a wind to blow across the earth, and all the water subsided, and the water subsided. The fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were stopped up, and the rain from the sky was held back. The waters then receded steadily from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters diminished, so that in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. So that is a slightly different timeline than you think of the 40 days and 40 nights, because if you just were paying attention pretty carefully, this goes on for a long time.
A little over a year.
Correct. When you add up the time that they were there, according to this, 150 days, the water diminished, so that in the 7th month, they started in the 2nd month, it's 5 months later, 150 days, that the waters stopped, the waters diminished, and the ark came to rest on the mountain of Ararat, which again, Hare Ararat, we think we know exactly where we're talking about here. It's in modern day Turkey, very high mountain. And according to this, that's where the ark came to rest. The waters went on diminishing until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. So according to this, then, they're in the ark for 5 months. The waters go on diminishing for another 3 months, almost, just short of a week, the 10th day of the third. So that's another, on the 1st of the 10th month. So it's again, it's about 3 more months, about 90 more days, 80 days of the waters going down. The waters became visible. And then it says at the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent out the raven. It went to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out the dove to see whether the waters decreased from the surface of the ground. But the dove could not find a resting place for its foot. So he returned to him in the ark, for there was water over all the earth. So putting out his hand, he took it into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came back to him toward the evening, and there in its bill was a plucked off olive leaf. And then Noah knew that the waters had decreased on the earth. And that's where we get the image of the dove with an olive leaf in its mouth to symbolize peace. From this image of the Noah story, sending out the dove. He waited still another 7 days, and he sent forth the dove, and it did not return to him anymore. And that's how he knew, right? In the 601st year, in the 1st month, on the 1st day of the month, the waters began to dry from the earth. And when Noah removed the covering of the ark, he saw that the surface of the ground was drying. And in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. And God spoke to Noah, saying, "Come out of the ark, together with your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds, animals, and everything that creeps on the earth, and let them swarm on the earth and be fertile and increase on the earth." True or vu, the original commandment, now once again repeated, be fertile and increase on the earth. And so Noah came out together with his son and his sons' wives, every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that stirs on earth came out by their families. So let's pause right there. And let's look at the flood story once again, because there's a few things in there that we already kind of pointed out, but we really do need to explain what just happened. Because when you read that story carefully, there are some jarring inconsistencies in the story that are troubling. And they are troubling because there's really no good answer for it, in the sense that when you read this story, which is one of the most famous stories in the Bible, you wonder, how can these things both be happening? Look, there's one author here, or one hand, if you will, which is very interested in how many days it took for the flood to last. The problem is there is this other stream that's going on here where it seems to be for 40 days and 40 nights. And if you want to say, well, it only rained for 40 days and 40 nights, the waters were on the earth for 150 days, it doesn't work, because the line that points out here, when it said in the middle of everything, or not in the middle, but at the end of everything, when it says at the end of 40 days, Noah opened up the window of the ark that he had made and sent out the raven. Now, why did it skip back to 40 days there? And so these kinds of glaring inconsistencies of how many animals you take of each kind, how how long did the flood actually last for? And probably, again, it's not the biggest issue, but it is one where we are like, what's going on here? What bird is it that Noah actually used to help with the with the reconnaissance mission? Now, all of us know the dove story. We all love the dove story. And actually, oftentimes the raven is given kind of not a lot of credit for it, and actually is oftentimes spoken of harshly, because the raven goes out to and fro and doesn't seem to do anything.
Mark?
It's not the case. Yeah, go on. Sorry. Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is going to sound very elementary or very juvenile, but what stopped them from reproducing on the ark?
I don't know. You mean, why didn't they reproduce on the ark?
Mhm. Yes.
Well, it's it's interesting you say that. So, part of it was like the traditional understanding was that they didn't reproduce on the ark, that they were too afraid, that everything was too afraid, and that they weren't sure what was going to happen when they came out, right? What were they going to find when they came out? So even the animals were terrified on the ark because it was dark and it was scary, and they were moving around. So there's this feeling like until they got out of the ark, they're almost, as Sarah pointed out, it's almost like they're reborn. They come out and now they're able to almost like they came out of a collective womb, and that they're now able to then each be fruitful and multiply. So there does seem to be this issue, because you're right. Some of these animals, especially like the rabbits, by the time you come out, there's like 1 million rabbits that just ran out, especially since there's no predators yet. The animals don't seem to be eating other animals yet. So yeah, some of these animals could have. So the rabbis really go that route by saying, no, there was no procreation going on. The people didn't procreate either, that the families didn't procreate, the humans didn't procreate, that one family.
My dad had a joke about what was Noah's first words when he got off the ark.
What?
No more pets.
Yeah, probably. Well, he doesn't seem to. We don't know what he did, because he never says anything. But yes, back to the raven. I just want to point out the raven usually gets passed over, and in some cases even given kind of not very good PR, because, well, look, ravens are oftentimes kind of scary animals. I mean, people look at them as kind of like harbingers of death, and they're scared of them, but they're also considered very powerful birds, and they're also considered very smart birds. And so in some cultures, the raven is even worshipped as a spirit animal. Now, what's interesting about this is that it actually initially seems to be that the raven is very much a spirit animal, and is actually maybe helpful in making the waters go back. Because when it says he sent out the raven and went to and fro in the water until the waters had dried up, it almost as if the raven is actually doing some of the cleanup work. And we don't get that, because the next line is, and then he sent out a dove. And so the dove gets the credit for it, and the dove goes out and then comes back because there's nowhere to go, and then comes back with some green branch, and we know things are getting better. Then he doesn't come back, and that's how we know. But what about this concept of like, what about the raven? So the raven, actually, there's a version, and this is one of the other ways that we can actually see what's going on here, and I'm going to show you now the authorship issue, where we get actually two different stories that were blended together. Now, sometimes the stories in the Torah are blended together and they're seamless. This is maybe not the most seamless editing, but for the most part, people read the story and they don't have an issue with it, because maybe they don't read it carefully enough, or they don't talk about some of these weird inconsistencies. But we're going to actually look at the story, and what I've done is now highlighted or I bolded the authorship. Now, we normally, the people who study the documentary hypothesis, and again, for those who have not done this before, the concept that there's different hands or different authors that were synthesized together is a hypothesis, and we call it the documentary hypothesis. We don't have proof. We don't have the evidence of who actually did this, but we do have enough information, if you will, to actually say this is probably a pretty good theory. It helps us in some cases, and in this case, I think it really helps us to understand the Torah and some of the differences. Why were two stories conflated together? Why wasn't just one picked? Well, oftentimes when it comes to a story that's really important and really well known, the editor actually chose to keep two versions of the story. We're going to look at it here, and we're also most definitely going to look at it in the story of Joseph, where I think it really helps when you look at Joseph's story, chapter 37, to see the different authors. But here it's very pronounced, and it's actually, and we also talked about it obviously a little bit in the Genesis version, because you have Genesis chapter 1, which is priestly version, the P, and Genesis chapter 2, which is the J version. We call the priestly version, the P author, because he seems to be most concerned with stuff that has to do with priests and Kohanim, but he also is very concerned, this priest, and it makes sense, with things like what's kosher and what's not kosher. What are clean animals and not clean animals? What are dimensions? What are the lengths of certain things? Because again, priests were very concerned with, the dimensions of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. Priests are also very interested in lineage and descendants. Who is descendant of who? The other authors sometimes really don't help us with who's the father of who, etc. P author always gets into descendants, to family trees. It's not that the other authors don't, it's just the P author always does. And the P author is also very concerned with time, which makes sense because the priests are concerned with holidays, with time, with marking the time. And so when we look at the P author, we really see some of these characteristics. The other really interesting thing that we know about the P author is that we see that the P author oftentimes refers to God by the name God, by Elohim, whereas the J author almost exclusively always uses the name for God, the Yud He Vav He, the proper name for God, which is the name that, again, in English is Jehovah. It's not Jehovah, so I have no issue saying it. But the name that is written out with the J in German, which is a Y sound, the English didn't keep the Y sound, so it's J. But the name for God that they use, which we write out as the Lord, or as we say in Hebrew, oftentimes Hashem, the name. So we don't say the name, we don't pronounce the name, the Yud He Vav He name. But when you see the word Lord, that takes the place of everywhere you see that, that's the Yud He Vav He name. So you're going to see the different shades of this, the bold and the not bold. And when you see this story now, you're going to see how it makes sense. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually read the J version first, and then I'm going to go back and show you the P version. And you'll see how these stories are woven together. Actually, no, you know what? We'll do the P version first because it starts with that. It's a little easier. It's a little easier to do that, to do the P version first. Now, you will see, by the way, the phrase, these are the generations of Noah in red, because that probably was an editorial. Whenever we see the words, these are the generations, the theory is, the hypothesis is that that was in that little prologue, or that little line, or half, it's really a phrase. That phrase is used by the editor to tell us, now we're going to tell you some stories. We're going to tell you about this guy. We're going to tell you about these people. And we're going to say Ella toldot. Now, and that's a clue.
What you're saying about the priest, and so the priestly writer, because I have that book too, that is the one that did the chapter 5. And I think what's really neat is that the chapter 5 is a graph.
Of the ages, yes.
Right, and then that Methuselah, the one who lives the longest, dies the year before the flood, and everyone. But it also makes it so that it lines up so that that Adam knew everybody up until that Adam did not know Noah, but he was the first one of that generation that he didn't know.
Correct. But that Methuselah would have known Adam, and he would have been the link. And interestingly, and again, I'm not saying go out and rent it, go out and watch it, but I will tell you that the Aronofsky version of Noah picked up on that and had Methuselah, who again is Noah's grandfather, to actually kind of be the father figure to Noah, and is the guy who gives Noah the information to be a good person and to kind of be that person, which is kind of based on, again, this idea, this concept that Methuselah would have been alive, that first of all, he's rewarded for his goodness by living so long, and that, yeah, he dies before the flood, so he doesn't drown in the flood, right? So because he's righteous, he's not gonna, once he's gone, now everybody's bad. Everything's gone bad. There's no one left good except for Noah, because then he would have had to been saved. I will tell you that this concept that, that there was something special about Methuselah was one of the reasons why Aronofsky cast Sir Anthony Hopkins to be Methuselah in the movie, because he wanted someone with gravitas and someone who could project that type of wisdom and power. And so he chose a very defined and well-known and respected actor to play Methuselah in the movie, because again, he is that link. So thank you for reminding us of how old these people are, and how the graph with a timeline would really give us the fact that these people are gone. Adam and Methuselah are gone by the time of the flood.
And that Methuselah knows every single person from the first man up until Noah. I mean, what would it be like if we knew if we knew 10 people back in our generation? We're lucky if we know 4 people back, our great grandparents. I mean, who knows their great great grandfather?
Absolutely.
What would that be like?
Yep. And so keep this in mind when we get to when we look at this author, this P author. That's why, it's sometimes when we see the J author, he's well known for being much more anthropomorphic in the way that he depicts God. We also see the J author as being a little bit more dramatic and a little bit more into conversations, more in dialogue. P author is not so concerned about dialogue. J author is usually got a little give and take. J author often also times throws in some puns, some language play, and also some humor, and seems to be a little bit more concerned with the women characters, which is why some people say that J might have even been a woman, because the J author gives a voice to the women, which P author doesn't usually do, which I guess would maybe, if you were profiling the P author as a priest, maybe isn't as concerned with it. So let's take a look at the P author, see if this makes more sense when we read it together as a text. So he starts off with, Noah was a just man, perfect in his generation, and Noah walked with God. And Noah fathered 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make an ark of gopher wood. Rooms with you shall you make in the ark, and shall pitch it inside and outside with pitch. And this is the fashion. Again, the translation is a little different, but it's a good translation. And this is the fashion by which you shall make it, the length, etc. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I do want to get to this part. And with you I will establish my covenant, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons and your wife's sons, of every living flesh, 2 of every sort you shall bring into the ark to keep with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds, etc. And to take of you all the food that is eaten, you shall gather it to you, and it shall be food for you. Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so he did. And the Lord said to Noah, come, you and your house. This is now the second version of it. Now, why do we know that this is a somewhat different version of it? Because, well, first of all,
It says Lord, not God.
well, yeah, that's true. It's with a giveaway. But when he says to you, come you and all your house into the ark, for I have seen righteous you, I have seen righteous before me in this generation. What we have here is this kind of recognition that Noah, in this version, we have Noah being told right away to get into the ark. Now, is there something missing from this that the editor just said, I don't need to include it? Because the previous line that was from this author, it says, and Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And then the next line would be, and the Lord said to Noah, come, you and all your house, for I have seen you righteous before me in this generation. And so it doesn't really explain how the ark is made, but it does say now that the ark is there. And so there isn't really an explanation for how the ark came about in this version, but Noah doesn't seem to build it in this version. There doesn't seem to be this same construction. Could be that we're missing that part. It could be that it was there originally and we just don't have it, but it's also possible that that the ark is actually made for Noah in that version. Look, you can make the decision. I'm only offering this as a way for you to see that there is a way to read this where when you read it, it doesn't seem as strange. Of every clean beast you shall take 7 pairs, the male and female, and of the beasts that are not clean, the male and his female. Of the birds by the air, 7 pairs, and the male and female to keep alive upon the face of the earth. Now you'd think that the P author would be the one who's more concerned about the sacrifices. And it doesn't seem like that's the case. It doesn't seem like the issue is really sacrificing, other than, again, as Sarah points out, that this is going to allow for there to be animals that other animals can prey upon. But I will tell you that it does set up a sacrifice. We didn't get to it yet, but at the beginning of chapter 8, we have a sacrifice, which they needed. They needed to have animals for. Yeah.
It totally feels like one of them doesn't go outside and spend time with animals, and the other one does. Right? Like one of them is like Jay is out there, like, much more like a shepherd, whereas priestly guy is like in the temple, right? He's not spending a lot of time like 2 of every kind is like, oh, you only need 2 and then they'll reproduce. Yep. The other one is more like, yeah, when they're all in a boat together, and and you're not going to tell a lion that he suddenly needs to eat grass.
Yep.
We better have some more sheep on the boat.
Yep. And it does seem like this is a more descriptive, again, as we oftentimes get, a more descriptive and kind of a more down to earth version of this, which is, again, getting your hands dirty. And in this version, again, the J version, it says, for in 7 days, another 7 days, I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from the face of the earth. So there in the J author, we have the 40 days and 40 nights. And Noah did according to all that God commanded him. Now we go back to this line, which again seems to be an insertion that is either from an editor or from somewhere else. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters were upon the earth. And again, we go back to the J author, though, and Noah went in, his sons and his wives, and his son's wife with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. And then I'm going to get to this part. And it came to, I'm going to skip the P author now. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now that makes exact sense when you read it, because it said, in 7 days, there's going to be rain for 40 days and 40 nights. You have a week to get settled, and then the rain's going to come. And it says, after 7 days, the waters of the earth, and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And the Lord closed him in, which is, again, the Lord literally shutting him in. A God that is very anthropomorphic, that's really there with him. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it was lifted above the earth, and the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth. And the ark went upon the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the water and the mountains were covered. All in whose nostrils was the breath of life, all that was in dry land died, and every living thing was destroyed upon the face of the ground. Both man and cattle and all creeping things and the bird of the heaven, all were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah remained alive, and those were with him on the ark. And the rain from the heaven was restrained, and the waters returned from the earth continually. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from the face of the ground. And the dove found no rest, and came back to the ark after 7 days. The other one came back, and again, 7 days, the 7-day theme. And he stayed out for 7 days and sent forth the dove, which did not come back to him anymore. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And Noah built an altar to the Lord and took every clean beast and of every clean bird and offered a burnt offering on it. Now that is where we finished, right up to the offering. But I want you to see that's why the J author has clean animals and not clean animals, because he's going to offer a sacrifice. Now, by the way, why does the priestly author not have Noah offering a sacrifice? Because quite frankly, he doesn't want other people offering sacrifices. I mean, it actually makes sense. The J author is doing what a normal person would do, which is, it came out of an ark, I want to thank God. P author doesn't even want to know about that. He doesn't want other people offering up sacrifices, because only priests can really offer up sacrifices. So that's actually a little secret, a little clue to why the priestly author doesn't talk about sacrifices. He's not interested in Noah offering sacrifices. He only wants priests in Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. So when we look at that story, the 40 days and 40 nights now makes sense. The other thing that makes sense is the story of the dove, because when I'm going to go back and read to you now the P author with what happens when they actually get in the ark, that's where we left it off.
Well, I'll say Jay clearly has no idea how long it takes to build something.
He doesn't seem to, in the J author, it almost seems like the ark is already there.
Mm-hmm.
The P author seems to have that Noah built the ark. J author, we're not even sure that the J author doesn't believe that the ark was literally put there by God for Noah to get into. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, and again, there you have the ages of Noah. The J author is not concerned at all with how old Noah is. It's not there at all. The 17th day of the month, the same day when all the fountains of the great deep broken up and the windows of heaven were open. Folks, this was the same line that we have in the priestly description of creation. Same words. When we talk about the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven, we're reading the way the priestly author described the creation of water and the separation of waters in the first chapter, in the second day of creation. This is an undoing of the second day of creation, and it's very connected to the second day of creation. And here we have again Noah, Shem and Ham and Japhet and the sons of Noah and Noah's wives. They go into the ark and they take every beast of its kind and the cattle after their kind and every creeping thing that keeps on it. That's the same words that the priestly author used at the beginning of creation, folks. It's the same thing, after their kind, Leminehu, or Lemino. Every time the priestly author says that, he's telling you everything is according to its place, every animal according to its place. He's talking about categorization and classification of animals, which is very important to the priestly author. Everything according to its kind, everything according to its place, everything with its place.
Do we have any idea how old this is?
No, but I will tell you that there are definitely disagreements and disputes of how old the different authorships are. But they're definitely 2,700 plus years old. So we're talking about at least 2,500 years, but probably closer to 2,700 or 2,800 years ago that these are written.
And how do we know that? By the words they use? By
the words, and also kind of by what's there and what's not there in the descriptions of certain things, and why some of this must have been written before the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. Now, the P author, again, all the flesh that died moved upon the earth, both of bird and cattle and of beast and of every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. This is the same words that the P author uses to describe the creation of animals. But here it says, and the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. And God remembered Noah, every living thing, and all the cattle with him on the ark, and made the wind to pass over the earth. Same kinds of ideas that we had, and the water subsided from the very beginning of creation, when God is hovering over the earth and is making the waters subside and go down. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped. And at the end of 150 days, the waters abated. It makes a lot more sense. And the ark rested on the 7th month and on the 17th day of the month on the mountains of Ararat, which again, a description of actually where it happened, a place.
The meaning is really clear. It's another creation.
Yeah, it's a undoing and a renewing of creation. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. And in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, where the tops of the mountains were seen, he sent forth a raven, which went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. And it came to pass in the 601st year, which means, again, 1 year later, in the first month, on the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, was the earth dried. And God spoke to Noah, saying, Go out from the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives and your sons' wives with you. Bring out every living thing that is with you, of all flesh, both bird and of cattle, and of every creeping thing on the earth, and that it may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply in the earth. That is pru or vu. That is the words, the key words that the priestly author gives us at the beginning of creation. Pru or vu, be fruitful and multiply. And Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping and every bird, whatever creeps on, after their kinds, went out of the ark. The priestly author loves that word, let me know. It's the same words that he uses when he describes what kind of animals you can eat. When the priestly author gives us a list of kosher animals, he uses that word over and over again, leminehu, according to their kind. So went out from the ark. That is a clear description of a word, again, that we have. So that's it for the priestly author. Again, priestly author tends not to get his hands dirty, does not have God closing up arks and doing these kinds of things. The J author loves stories like the dove going back and forth. It's not that the priestly author doesn't have a little bit of a story. I mean, the priestly author also has a bird story. The raven goes back and forth until the water's dried up. So the priestly author is actually the one that has the raven doing his work. But the story makes a lot more sense when it's actually pulled apart. And so you have, two versions of a story that were woven together. Both versions were probably loved and were well known. And the editor probably wanted to have two versions of this story and to preserve two versions of this story. I admire the editor's work at trying to keep these two stories together. I think probably the hardest part was the 40 days and the 150 days. I mean, I think that those are just too hard to, like, I would have given up on one. You either do one or the other. You can't have both. And that's probably the thing that bugs me the most. I probably also don't like the fact that both birds had to get their way in there, because pick one, pick a bird, say, I like the raven story, or I like the dove story. But look, from his standpoint, the raven did his job, and then the dove did his thing. So, like, if people said to him, hey, you didn't include the raven story, then he would have gotten in trouble because the raven story wasn't there. Everybody loves the raven story. You can't tell the flood story without talking about a raven. And then other people said, well, you have to have the dove part. And so he put together both things. And again, both birds have a role to play in this. So, they're both here. And
I wonder if the priest didn't like the dove because, dove is essentially a pigeon, right? I mean, and they were sacrificed. A chief sacrifice during temple times was a pigeon.
Yeah.
So I wonder if he didn't want to, in going with not, I don't know, but
maybe, but I will tell you, look, when you ask why do they keep both, I mean, people could have said you got to have both. You can't not have that story. You can't not tell the raven story, but the dove story is a story. I mean, the way P tells the story is the raven went back and forth and the water dried up.
I always like the idea of the raven because they're scavengers, and it's like if the dead are out there and the dead have then the ravens go back and forth eating the dead until the dead are gone.
I guess that's a pretty macabre. That's a macabre vision.
Well, I mean, yeah, but then it
version.
Then it is with the dove eating like a leaf. So now we know there's trees out there, as opposed to just floating dead bodies or whatever.
Yes, well yes, but I do think that again, I was only pointing out that the J author knows how to tell a story. The P author tends to just give us the details, and there's a lot of details and a lot of, again, in some cases, repetition. But the J author really tells a story, right? And a J author tells us, look, and it's a descriptive story, right? He said the dove, and the dove found no rest for the sole of its foot. I mean, that's a beautiful phrase, right? It's not just saying the dove returned to the ark because there was no place to stop. The dove found no rest. The dove found no rest for the sole of his foot, right? And he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her into the ark. I mean, that's not just, that it came back. I mean, it's a very descriptive way of telling the story, and it
feels like someone. sitting by the fire
It's a
with a group of
storyteller.
people,
Yeah.
telling
It's
the story.
It's a storyteller, and so we have these two stories that were woven together, and so again, we have both. They're together. In the end, this is what we have. I will tell you, again, I don't rely on this a lot. I don't use it a lot. I don't bring it out a lot. But there are certain times when it makes sense to, and there's certain points where you go, well, wait a second, let's show how this works. And again, oftentimes it's, well, in this case, obviously most of chapter 7, or excuse me, chapter 6 is the most of chapter 6 is the P author, and most of 7 is the J author. Actually, not most, but a good chunk of it. But we do have both, and so it does give us that effect. Again, one of the reasons that we know that this story was so important is that there are two versions, and so when we have double versions of the story, it doesn't tell us that we're not sure that the story happened. It actually gives more credence to the fact that these stories were very important. They were central to people's belief. So when we get to like two versions, we have two slightly different versions of the crossing of the Sea of Reeds. When we read those two stories, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means it was so important that lots of people told a version of that story because it was such a popular and such a well-known and such a central, pivotal story for people. So when we have those two versions of the story, like one version of the story of the crossing of the Red Sea, it says that Moses and Miriam led the people, or in one place it seems like Miriam's leading the people. So it's we have two versions of it. It's not
Rabbi,
yeah.
Doesn't every civilization, every group of people have a flood story?
Yep.
So this is something that happened, seen from many groups of people, tribes, cities, civilizations.
And exactly that point, Joyce, is that even within our culture, even within the ancient Jewish culture, the ancient Israelite people, there were two versions of the story.
Yes.
And so we have, the Gilgamesh version that we found, the Sumerian, Mesopotamian versions of these stories. We have the African stories. We have all these different cultures that had flood stories. And again, we understand it because it's probably explaining that as people did this tremendous calamity that happened in the ancient world. And we know that people were alive during the end of the last great ice age. And as people were coming to terms with how do they explain how entire cities or villages were wiped off the face of the earth immediately. Like one day they came out and there was no city there anymore. There was a city right by that lake and now it's gone. Well, there was a huge flood. God created a flood that created, and they would see this and they knew it. And their generations after generations passed on these oral traditions of the flood, and everybody had this story. So I think, it's been backed up by, it's backed up by the archaeology, by the geology, by every level of our understanding of the ancient world. And again, it happened at a time when people didn't have literary tradition. So we don't have a written account of it as it's happening, because it was pre-literate, we call, cavemen days, if you will. Right. But the reality is that the fact that these stories persisted shows you how critical it was for human understanding of the world that they lived in and the world that they inherited. And so what's interesting about this, and we're going to get to it now, is we can have these different versions. And again, I don't want to focus too much on it either. So what do we learn from it, right? What's the Jewish take on this? And again, part of the Jewish take on this, of course, is that there's hope, right? That God wants to give these people another try, that he's going to say, hey, look, at least Noah, I'm going to give him another try. I'm going to give him a start. And so
our story is different because we get the law. They have the Noah law, but our take on this is that there needs to be laws. There needs to be like the Noahide laws or our Torah law for us. And where the other stories, Gilgamesh and some of the others, are the gods are fighting, or Gilgamesh wants to be immortal.
He wants to live forever. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's different. Forever.
Yeah. So we kind of have a different take on the same story.
Yeah. Now we do have a version of the living forever, maybe perhaps in the Tower of Bavel story, which we're going to read next week. But yeah, it's very possible that, again, the takeaway from this that we take away as Jews is that there is hope. And that's what we're going to see now. This is what we're going to finish with for the last part of the class, is we're going to go back to what we have, which is, again, the part that, even though it's in Jay and it's not a priestly author that's telling us, he's very focused on this wonderful offering. And watch what happens.
It would
Noah,
be interesting.
yeah.
No, I'm sorry. It would be interesting to know if the dove or the raven are symbols in different, in different societies, or different, like Mesopotamia, or, I mean, they had different animals that were important to them. That might be a symbol of something.
So there are, we have kind of looked at how ravens are, they're very different. They're perceived differently in different cultures. Even within one culture, they're perceived differently. So it's not like in Chinese culture or Native American culture, ravens are all scary, or they're all they're all good, or they're all powerful. But symbolism is very important. And it seems as though maybe, again, even within Jewish tradition, there were different takes on these birds. And was that actually one of the little clues, we believe it is, as to why we have two different versions of it. But again, we can definitely take away from this, the raven doesn't do anything bad. He actually seems to maybe even be heroic in this. So,
well, they're brilliant birds. They can actually recognize people's faces. They're the smartest of birds. Other than the hummingbird is also very intelligent, but the raven is very smart.
And
not so much the dove.
And we do see the raven in Jewish tradition is well, actually, let me tell you this. Since we're talking about the raven, oftentimes they're associated with prophecy, with being messengers of the gods. I mean, technically speaking, he's the first. The raven is the first bird that's actually named explicitly in the Bible. So the first bird that's actually identified not just as a bird is the raven. I mean, technically the dove is the second, but the raven is actually the first. Actually, might be the first. Just trying to think if there's any actual animals that are described yet. I don't think there's actually been an animal. Well,
other than the snake.
Yeah, the snake is mentioned. So yeah, snake is mentioned. And actually, I was thinking about in the sacrifice of Cain and Abel, it actually says from the flock. So it doesn't actually say specifically. But yeah, the snake is definitely mentioned. You're right. Snake is mentioned. And so ravens have an interesting role in the Bible. The ravens actually bring food to Elijah, the prophet, when he's hiding out from King Ahab, and Jezebel. They actually bring him food. So they're doing God's bidding there. There's also kind of a midrash that, going back to Karen Barnett's point, that the ravens are actually punished by having to go out of the ark early, because it seems like the raven does go out early, right? Or comes out early. And so the rabbis actually point out that, back to Karen's point, the ravens are the only animals that aren't scared to have sex on the ark. So essentially they get thrown out of the ark because they're having sex on the ark.
Is that a midrash?
Yeah, that's one of the midrash of where you get that. Look, the problem is, well, look, here's the raven gets set up by the way that this goes down, because if the dove doesn't come out, right, if there's no dove story, the raven looks fine. The problem is that the dove comes out after the raven and comes back and tells everybody everything's okay. So, and the dove is seen as a symbol of peace, and it's as Sarah pointed out, it's the most common sacrifice. So there seems to be this idea that the raven is a symbol of darkness and badness, whereas the dove is a symbol of peace. And so they're kind of juxtaposed. There's no reason for that, again, and I really don't like the fact the raven gets the raven gets treated this way, but we do have that that tradition too. So, but they are sometimes associated with death. They are associated with as we also pointed out, that they're scavenger, or they eat carrion, they eat dead flesh. So
And once upon a midnight dreary, as we pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, as so quoth the way raven, nevermore.
Just in time for Halloween.
Yeah. Well,
exactly.
I will tell you that how long if we're going to talk about cultural depictions of ravens and at least crows, they're not depicted very well in Dumbo. I think they've actually taken Dumbo off because of the depiction of the crows, and that they've actually thrown out Dumbo because he's been PC'd out. He's been canceled, Dumbo, or not Dumbo, but I guess the whole movie. So yeah, it became an ethnic identification, I guess. Anyways, yeah, I would just say it's not easy, and again, it's partly because of the way the Bible lays out the dove as the hero of the story. But anyways, what happens here after they get out of the ark is where the last part of this is. It says the Lord, so they made the altar and takes every clean animal and every clean bird. He offered up burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the pleasing odor, and the Lord said to himself, never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the devising of man's mind are evil from his youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living being as I have done. So long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And so God says, I'm not messing with the natural order anymore. Everything's going to be the way it is. I've created human beings the way they are. And again, I'm not going to doom them anymore for it, because I realize that that's just what they are. Now, what's interesting about this is that he doesn't see Noah get out of the ark and say, oh, we survived. The good people survived. He doesn't say that.
No.
The people that we're starting over with are also messed up. But I know they're messed up. And so what really happens here, as much as we see human development, we see God's development, or at least God's acceptance, which is that God says, you know what? I'm going to accept my children for what they are. I am not going to expect them to do things that they can't do. And they can't seem to get their minds around doing the right thing. And I can help them. Maybe I'll help them a little bit better, but I can't punish them anymore by destroying them. So I'm not going to do it. The destruction's now off the table. I'm pulling that off as a punishment, which, by the way, tells us not so much about human beings, because we haven't changed. I mean, according to this, we haven't changed, but God changed. God changed. God developed. Because the people get off and they're still there. It says the devisings of man's mind are evil from his youth. But
maybe it wasn't so easy for God to watch everybody die.
Yep. And now God realizes that for whatever is happening, that this is the way things are going to be. But what Noah does here, and again, maybe this is the redemptive part of Noah, is that he offers this sacrifice. And by offering a sacrifice, Noah goes back to his ancestor, or our ancestor Abel, and offers up a sacrifice. And what's interesting is that the words here are very clear. This reach nichoach, which we have throughout the book of Numbers, over and over again, we have a pleasing odor. And God actually, it's pleasing to God. It's pleasing to God. And God actually seems to be changed by this offering. God literally says, you know what? I'm going to let people continue, even though they're messed up. Because you know what? In some way, I know what they are. And they still, there's this attempt that they make of showing appreciation to me. And again, you could say, well, they got out of the ark and they were so scared of God and they were afraid and they didn't really want to get out of the ark. And what were they feeling, by the way, which is in the Russell Crowe version, which is maybe they didn't really want to come out of the ark, or they were afraid to come out of the ark. But this idea that they had enough faith in God to offer up a sacrifice actually, to some extent, makes God change and say, you know what? This is not going to happen anymore. And so the Jewish takeaway from this story, as we're seeing, is not just Noah and his family were good. It doesn't really even say that. But what it does say is that God understands us, and that we know as human beings that God is not going to do this. We don't have to live in fear of God ultimately destroying all of us. Now, will God wrathfully destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah? No question. But God's not going to destroy the whole world. And so God doesn't do that anymore. God says, I will not do that. As long as the earth endures, things are going to be normal, and things will happen in a normal way. Cold and heat, summer and winter, the seasons will go as they're supposed to go, and we're not going to throw things out of whack anymore.
There's one thing I noticed here that I don't notice that we pay much attention to. We pay attention to vision and hearing, what we see and what we hear. And God noticed pleasing odor.
Huh.
I don't see any humans responding to odor and fragrance, and that is different.
Yeah, you figure they've had enough to smell in that ark, right? It must have stunk.
It did smell bad in there, but wait a second.
But
So
God always notices the pleasing odor.
So what's the takeaway, that God notices odor as opposed to those other things that human beings notice?
Well, I think it adds another dimension to what we as human beings should or possibly should be paying more attention to, the fragrances around us, and noticing it and appreciating it as God appreciates the pleasing odor. We don't seem to pay as much attention, and maybe it's a lesson for us.
You're right.
Part of Joyce's ritual.
It's a great to stop and smell the roses, right?
Yes.
Right, and it's aromatherapy.
And part of my, who mentioned ritual? David, did you say that?
That was David.
Okay, part of my ritual in my regular days in remembrance of Lee, after I bathe, I put on his cologne. First thing I do, put it on the front and the back of my hands. I may put my cologne around my face and hair, but I am very aware of the fragrance that he uses. And one of my rituals in remembrance of him is to use his cologne daily, every day.
Interesting. Well, we know that triggers the deepest part of our brain, right? The sense of smell triggers the deepest parts of our brain, and it's the ones that trigger memories. It's the ones
you've got it,
that trigger some of our deepest senses and our longest lasting memories.
And that's what the Lord noticed.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, it does require another level of commitment. That you're right. The sight, if you want to take that another step, that sight is one of them, and to some extent, maybe the hearing is the most superficial level of sensing something, right? It takes the least amount of effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
although
actually,
interestingly,
like you say, we have to stop and smell the roses. The stopping part is required, because if we don't roll down the window, and if we don't actually take a moment to go by it and to actually consciously make that decision, we might miss it.
But hearing is one of the first things that we have in the womb. And now that I do so much hospice, it's the last thing to go before people die.
Yes,
one of the last things
that's true.
They can hear right up to the end. When you were going over the changes in God, it has always made me wonder, with all of the names in the Bible that have so much meaning, why would Noah mean comfort? But then it occurred to me when you were talking about God changing, that perhaps it's God's comfort, that Noah is a comfort to God because God didn't destroy everything. God left one last part.
I thought it was a comfort to us because we know that God won't destroy the earth again.
Yeah, I guess both ways, right, Mom? It's can be maybe he's that thing that connects.
And so, I mean, develop that. I mean, finish that thought off.
That he is the connection between because God's sense of comfort that God did not destroy all people, but also people's sense of comfort that that God did not destroy all people. That connecting link that we both have comfort in people continuing even though we're flawed.
And Rabbi, in the Russell Crowe version, there was the idea that God was going to kill everybody, kill all mankind. And clearly in the story in the Bible, it was just a starting over. But Noah, in the Russell Crowe version, he was instructing his sons about when this one goes and when this one goes and when this one goes, and then we'll all be gone.
Yeah, no, in that is 100%. They took that understanding that Noah actually is, there is this sense of, are we really starting over, or are we just, does this generation just get to not die, or do they actually get to restart? And in the Russell Crowe method or version of telling this story, we really get this where Russell Crowe is fine with this being the way we go out. We're going out, and there's not going to be any continuation of humanity. And so there is that, when we get this line where God says, no, be fruit, be fertile, and multiply, this is really God saying, no, you're not just surviving, you've got to restart. And this is a huge step. And you're right, from going from, and there is that sense on the ark. Are they really doing this to repopulate? I mean, look, I mean, if you're going to take one of every animal, then you're kind of like saying, well, this is a starting over mission. But there is that sense of, in the Noah version that Russell Crowe did, which is an interesting idea, which is that their job is really just to get the animals back to repopulate, that they're not repopulating. And that's why, Russell Crowe doesn't want to repopulate, is he takes the message from God is that we're going to start over without people here. So there's that possibility, which is, the animals get to start over, but not with us here. And so there is that sense of, well, are we survivors, or are we actually now the people who are going to be progenitors of the next generation? It's very interesting, though, if you think about it. And I guess I didn't realize this before, but the word, and again, this is more of a Hebrew thing. So you see Noah's name, right? You see Noah right here, Noah with the ch part. And if you look at the word for pleasing odor, it says Vayarach Adonai et reach nichoach. So the word Noah is actually a version of the word pleasing and comfort. And so, to get to Sarah's point, is, why is his name Noah? Why is his name comfort? Because to some extent he is that comfort. He provides that comfort to God, which is that he is the reach nichoach. He is actually the comforting. He is the most comforting to God, which is that God knows that I can start over with these people. This is again. We're gonna read one line after this into the next one, and then or actually not one line. We're gonna read. We're gonna finish. I don't know if we can go into. Well, this is really the covenant part. Hold it one second. I'm just like, how do we? Yeah, you know what we'll do? We will read we'll read the covenant. We're gonna read the first. We're going to read right to verse 17. So let's read. We're going to read a few verses here, but this is a good place to break it. So we're going to break it here after we do this part, the beginning of chapter 9. We're halfway through chapter 9. So it says, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fertile, pruervu, and fill the earth. Again, Very clear, the words pru or vu. And the fear and the dread of you shall be upon all the beasts of the earth and upon the birds of the sky, everything with which the earth is astir, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. Every creature that lives shall be yours to eat, as with green grasses. I give you all these. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood in it. But for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every beast of man too. Will I require a reckoning for human life of every man, for that of his fellow man? Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in his image did God make man. And then it ends with, be fertile, then an increase, and abound the earth and increase on it. So here we have this great little lesson, which is that human beings are given permission to eat from the animals. For the first time, they were not given permission to eat from the animals at the beginning, but they are here when they get out of the ark. Now, this is the good news. You can all now go out and eat animals, but you can't eat blood. No blood, which again seems to be consistent with this idea that blood is something very powerful, and you're not supposed to have blood in the meat. And this is where we get actually this Noahide law. This one of these laws that's incumbent on not just Jews, but everybody, that you're not supposed to have blood. So this is a Noahide law. This is a law for humanity. And when we get to maybe next week, we'll talk about what are those Noahide laws. This is one of them universally, because this does seem to be a commandment, a mitzvah for everybody, not just for Jews, for everyone who's a descendant of Noah, which is everybody.
But I wonder whether lifeblood means that the animals were still alive when they were eating them, because wasn't that a thing in the
yes, so this,
they would cut off pieces?
So this idea that, again, this would prevent that type of situation where people would cut off a piece of an animal and then eat that, and then put tar or pitch over that wound, and then cut off another piece before they had refrigeration. That this is what they would do in order not to kill an animal all at once and then have to have it go to rot. Again, it's considered a horrible idea. And again, something that Judaism said, that's not acceptable. We can't cause suffering for animals.
And it feels too like if the two, these are the two rules, then these are the two things that were happening. That's the two things that they were doing. They were killing each other and eating animals that were still alive.
It's possible, but it's also possible that this focus on blood, if you will, goes back to the story of Cain and Abel too, which is this idea that blood is the source of life. It is the animating juice of life, right? It's the gas, if you will, that causes human beings and animals to move. And when you remove it from the animal, then the animal's not really alive anymore, so we can eat it. And so it really requires you almost to make this animal almost like rendering it so that it's never been alive, right? You have to take out all the life from it. But this idea but if you take blood, if a person's blood is shed, which is the word that's used, if you shed the blood of man, that you will be killed, that your blood will be exchanged for that blood, and so that there's an accounting of blood. So this is the if you will, this is the punishment and again, the answer for why do people eat animals, to some extent, it's to get that bloodlust out of them. It's to allow them to have an outlet for their more carnal needs, which to me is the reason I became a vegetarian after reading that October 20 something of 1995, 94. When I read that 27 years ago, I said, I'm not eating animals anymore because I don't need to shed blood. I don't shed the blood of animals, but I'm hiring someone else to do it. I'm not even getting any benefit from it. I'm not getting any of my carnal bloodlust fulfilled by doing this. I'm buying kosher meat. At the time, every time I had meat, it was kosher meat. I was like, I don't even see, there's no blood. I'm following the law, but it doesn't do anything for me. It's not helping me become, I don't think, a better person. I don't know that anybody is. And there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off, because if you eat animals, the fear and the dread of you shall be upon the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the sky and everything with which there's all this lovely animals now that you got on the ark. And don't expect that to happen anymore, because the fear and dread of you shall be upon them. And I do know, and I do believe, because I've seen it in practice, that animals can smell flesh on people. They have amazing senses of smell. You know that. Everybody knows that. But I will tell you that when I became a vegetarian, animals were not as scared of me. And I don't mean like, dogs and cats and the animals, but I'm telling you, if I went to a petting zoo or if I went to a place where there'd be goats and stuff, all of a sudden these animals were not scared of me because they probably didn't smell their own brothers and sisters' flesh in my body anymore. And I will tell you that there is something to be said for the fact that animals probably have a much better sense of who's an animal eater and who's not. And so again, this is part of the trade-off. The trade-off is that animals, no human being's ever going to be able to do what you did, which is get a bunch of animals on an ark. That ain't ever happening again. And so you can eat them all, but this is the trade-off. The fear and the dread of you is going to be on them. And again, you can eat them. You can eat them just like you were eating the grasses. So it's very clear that people were not given permission. So again, as Sarah's already thrown out there, maybe people were breaking the law anyways. And so they were essentially now given permission to do it. There's another possibility, which is that they didn't do it, and that God felt that if they were able to do it, then they would get that energy of killing themselves and killing other human beings out by killing the animals instead. Both of those things are possibilities.
I still think it's really important that we get the law. That, to me anyway, I know the rabbi said that we had the law forever, but to me, they're going along and now they've gotten law and they've got rules. That's the gift. I
will say that there is, and that is definitely given over by the Noahide tradition, which is now there is laws for people to follow. And that one of them, not eating animals with blood in them, and the other one, don't kill people. So not killing people is definitely a law for everybody. Yeah. That is a law for everybody. Be fertile and increase. That's not necessarily a commandment because, well, animals can do it. And so we don't say something's a mitzvah if an animal can do it. And of course, if a human being can't be fertile and multiply, that doesn't mean that they're not fulfilling a mitzvah.
And so that blood is sacred. This is something, animals don't see blood as sacred.
Correct. And that is something that you're right, that human beings are at least supposed to think about.
Yeah.
And we're going to finish with what?
That life is sacred.
Yeah. And again, there's a consequence for the shedding of blood. So we're going to finish with these. And God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I will establish my covenant with you and your offspring to come, with every living thing that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every wild beast as well. All that have come out of that ark, every living thing on earth. I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. By the way, that doesn't mean that there won't be other destructions, which again could be not flood related, which is why the rabbis also point out Sodom and Gomorrah aren't destroyed by a flood. They're destroyed by hailfire and brimstone. They're destroyed by the sky being on fire over them. Essentially, by the way, we now know, according to geology and science, and actually it's been proven by the archaeology of the region, the area was destroyed by an asteroid. And we actually now know that actually happened. So this isn't just a matter of well, it's telling us a story that's supposed to scare us. It actually probably, again, is the biblical version of how that happened or what happened when those areas of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, which we will get to. It's been in the news in the last few days. And when we read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, now we'll be able to bring that little story in of how that region was destroyed before the time of Abraham, but not that far in the past that people wouldn't have been talking about that story, just like they talked about the flood story. And let's finish with these beautiful lines of the rainbow, especially since we're in the rainy season right now.
If you think about the things too that will really destroy the earth and end our existence, it's really the way we treat animals. Like get cows, that then too many cows for eating, the way that we treat our land and the way we treat each other, like nuclear weapons and all those things. So those two rules, how you treat the animals and not killing people, not if we don't pay attention to those, that is what brings the end of the world.
Both of those things would qualify for how we're going to destroy ourselves. No doubt about it. And it's not just the pollution that we're creating, it's also the fact that we're breeding disease. And whether or not there was a human agent involved in creating the virus, or whether it was spread through wet markets in China, the reality is that we know that there is disease that's spread, avian flu, some of the other diseases that were spread out of some of these places where they do not have animal health is not considered important at all. There's
and where
no
they're
question.
eating unclean animals.
And where, as people know, especially you dog lovers know, there's some horrible treatment of dogs, and I would argue any animals that are going on in China that is abhorrent and is very disturbing that it's still going on. Again, the Chinese don't like talking about it, and they don't like people bringing it up, but it is definitely going on in China. So here's the beautiful covenant. This is a sign that I've set for the covenant between me and you and every living creature with you for all ages to come. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign for the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living thing on all flesh, so that all the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all the living creatures and all flesh that is on the earth. And that, God said to Noah, shall be a sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all the flesh on the earth. And that, folks, is what the covenant of the rainbow is. We call it the covenant of Noah. It's the covenant of the rainbow. It's a brit. It's a covenant. It's saying that when God sees it, God will remember. I'm not destroying the people by flood anymore. I got to stop. Got to stop the waters. Can't have that happen again. And it's also now a sign for you to see, right? That you will never again, right? And that cloud is going to be a remembrance for you. And so people and God will see the rainbow, and it should give us hope. And we should know that the rain will stop. And again, it's why the rainbow is such a powerful and such a everlasting, eternal sign for peace and for hope, that the rain will end. And again, when we see a rainbow, it reminds us not just that the rains will end, right? Not just that the waters are going to go down, but that there is hope. And that when we have days that we feel like we're being rained on, that there will be a rainbow that will bring us life and joy. Again, that there'll be a rainbow. And
I don't know anybody that sees a rainbow and says, you know, everyone's got, when you see a rainbow, I think everyone just feels like, wow, you know, it's so remarkable. Yep. Who goes, a rainbow, you know, nobody says that.
And this is now the words for this are almost the same as they are in the covenant where we say Shabbat is a covenant for all time. When we say in Vishamru, and we say, you know, Brit Olam, and here it is again, the Brit Olam, Bain, and we say Bain, we say Bain B'nai Israel, we say between, in Vishamru, we say between Israelites and the people of Israel and God. Here it's Ben Elohim uvein kol nefesh chaya. So here it's between, what's the covenant? Who's the covenant between? Between God and all living things, not just humans actually, but all living things. Kol nefesh chaya b'chol basar, all living things, all flesh that's on the earth. And so this is, again, very clearly this is the priestly author, which means, again, priestly author he's not like hard, you know, he's not a hard-hearted person. It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful description of what a rainbow is. It's not necessarily the most poetic version of it. It's kind of repetitious, and it's not necessarily the way the J author would have told us the story. But you know what? It's still a beautiful story, and it's still a beautiful way of remembering it. And again, even if the priestly author focuses more on the fact that this is a brit, that it's a covenant, it's okay, because because however you want to describe it, it's a sign. The rainbow is a symbol, and it's a symbol of hope. And so I hope, again, we'll always find those rainbows that we say that will inspire us and give us hope and help us to know that the rains will stop. We definitely need more rain. We had some good rain this week, and of course we need a few more days of rain and fill up our reservoirs and our places of life. For those of us that are in Southern California, for those that are still being rained on, well, look, we're not as hardy as you, but we do need rain. And so again, let's hope that we have a good season of rain. We hope that however much rain falls, that we do get to see the rainbows in life. And I want to thank everybody again for being here with us to read about this. Next week, we're going to be reading about, well, we're going to be reading about the various ways that our world then fills back up with different nations and different peoples, and the story that we read of the Tower of Babel. We actually have a couple more verses about Noah and how things start going off.
Tower of Babel is important because of
Yes. But we also are going to read a little bit about how things start to go that direction, even during Noah's time. So thank you, everybody. Again, hope to see you.
There's some PTSD there with Noah. I think it's legit. There's some PTSD. I think it's a great example of what happens to a person when they see a genocide and survive.
Listen, they're definitely, when we get to it next week and we read the story of what happens to Noah, there's definitely ways of psychoanalyzing and understanding him and giving him some leeway for it. But I will tell you, it also builds up the idea that maybe Noah's not, this is just the best that God had to work with, because he does seem to kind of go off the rails real quick. But it also, again, it's one of the reasons why we're all B'nai Noah, but why people who are followers of Abraham have a different legacy and a different responsibility for the world. And we do recognize that. So remember, we've got Wendy's leading services on Friday night. So we're going to have our third week in a row of having services together. And we look forward to seeing everybody, if not there, then online and next week for our studies together. Tuesday, we're reading Judges, the book of Judges. So we're going to read the story of Deborah next week, and we're going to on Tuesday, and then we get to come back and read some great stuff here.
You hear about Noah making wine?
Read about Noah making wine. So you can all get your wine ready if you want to have a little glass of wine as we read about Noah. But don't drink too much, because as you're going to see,
he did.
Noah didn't have very.
He's the first alcoholic. He has
Exactly
to deal with.
The first guy who makes wine and the first coincidentally, the first alcoholic. So anyways, we will see y'all next week, if not before. So take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Bye.
Thanks very much.